Is the Canon EOS R5 Mark II worth the upgrade at $42.99? Or should you stick with the Mark I, currently priced at $28.99, or even consider the Nikon Z8 for $34.96? I'm going to identify several key improvements over the Mark I to help you make your decision. But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. One of the biggest annoyances for video shooters in the R5 Mark I was that micro HDMI port. The good news with the Mark II is that we finally get a full-size HDMI port, and what that should really help do is minimize all those repair bills due to, well, that micro HDMI port. And while the autofocus was pretty good with the Mark I, the Canon EOS R3 and the more affordable R6 Mark II offer a faster, more accurate autofocus system with some new enhancements. And while the original R5 does have a very good autofocus system, it was really terrible when it came to locking onto a subject when that subject was in a crowd, when other objects or subjects would get in the way. Putting together this clip of my son at karate was a challenge. It took me over an hour to get enough video because the autofocus kept jumping around as subjects got in the way. But the Canon EOS R5 Mark II gets a huge update. It gets the exact same autofocus system as the Canon EOS R1, with the exception of the minor modifications to the sensor design. It's able to track subjects even when other subjects or objects get in the way, such as playing sports or doing karate. And that's a really big improvement. It's also able to track more subjects, more animals, and more objects, or planes and boats, and that's a really big deal. So a definite improvement for both photographers and videographers with the R5 Mark II. Another improvement over the Mark I is the ability to shoot up to 30 frames per second. Now that's electronic. With mechanical, it's still 12 frames per second. But in combination with the stacked sensor and a much faster readout speed that Canon claims isn't far off of the R3, this means that rolling shutter is almost non-existent. Almost. For most of us, for most photographers, this isn't going to be an issue, but if you're shooting sports, anything where you have a small round ball, such as golf, baseball, soccer, or anything like that where it's moving at high speeds, even the much faster readout speed of the R5 Mark II, thanks to its stacked sensor, is going to still deliver a slight distortion. And if you're shooting for professional magazines or for other media sources, that distortion is going to get in the way. And for those types of scenarios, and this is a question I was asked on yesterday's live stream, is where would I get the R1 over the R5 Mark II? Well, if you're shooting sports, fast action photography, where you have certain, how should we say, shapes that, like such as a circle, like a golf ball, if there's any distortion there, even somebody who doesn't understand golf is going to see that. So for shooting sports and fast action, you'd be better off getting, well, the R1 or at the very least the R3. But for most every other scenario, that faster readout speed from the new stacked sensor and up to 30 frames per second, well, it means that you're not going to miss many shots. Dynamic range is very important for video as well as photography, but in video it helps generate a realistic looking scene. 16 stops of dynamic range can now be achieved through Canon Log 2. And for video shooters such as myself, this improvement, along with that full-size HDMI port, is almost reason enough just to upgrade to the R5 Mark II. But I'm not done yet, and I'm going to talk more about the video capabilities in terms of Canon Log 2 and 8-bit just a little bit later on in this video. But who can forget the overheating complaints of the Mark I? Firmware update 1.6 did greatly improve the ability of the R5 Mark I to be able to deliver video and stills in hot environments. But the Mark II now has heat pipes that allows the camera to dissipate heat from the internals to the outside, all while without reducing weather sealing. And this is going to further extend record times. But to further distance itself from the Mark I, Canon introduced the BG-R20 active cooling battery grip. And while we don't have the results or any test results at this point, because if you've been watching the review videos like I did yesterday, well, they're all working with pre-production units, and some of them were so early enough that they couldn't even show anything but the camera themselves. But I want to bring up a point that Mark brought up earlier. You see, one of the problems I'm hearing now is that the R5 Mark II is overheating like the Mark I. But there are a few settings that you need to turn on, such as what was made available in firmware 1.6 on the Mark I. and that is that overheat power off temp setting. You need to change that from standard to high. If you don't do that, you're going to get overheating on both cameras. Also, when you're recording video, make sure that the LCD is flipped out, because right behind that LCD is where you have all those internal components, and without that, you're going to further generate heat. Now with the R5 Mark II, it does have those heat pipes, but if you're going to be shooting in the tropics in really hot environments, and you're going to be shooting for, dare I say it, more than several minutes at a time, then what you should really consider getting is that cooling grip with the active heat system. So what it has, it still has 2 batteries that it can put in there to extend your recording time, but it has a fan, and what that fan does is going to blow air through those heat pipes, allowing you to extend your recording time. So all I can say is the Mark I, since firmware 1.6, and I'm in what is referred to as an extreme climate. So for about 8 months of the year, it's cold enough that I don't have to worry about things. But right now in summer, it gets up to 90, 95 degrees with extreme humidity, and it's challenging for any electronic device. But firmware 1.6 with auto power off temp set to high, and of course the LCD flipped out, certainly made a huge difference. Another bane for video shooters is that IBIS wobble. It created a warping effect that rendered a lot of, well, footage to the trash bin. It's apparent when shooting at 35mm or wider, and it's more evident when the subject is further from the camera, or you're shooting landscapes, as you can see here. Peter McKinnon reports,
"For everything we shot during the Matt Barnes shoot, I didn't notice any significant IBIS wobble at all."
Okay, so that's a little bit vague. Maybe Peter McKinnon really wasn't paying much attention to the footage, correct? I mean, a guy that has a business where his life and the bread that he puts on the table is related to his capabilities as a producer, as a director, as producing videos, didn't notice it? No. Let's hear what else Peter had to say about this.
That's not to say it's not there, but I didn't notice that very specific warp. So that's second issue of mine remedied.
And the R5 Mark II offers internal 24-bit 4-channel audio. And the camera also offers upscaling and increased noise reduction. So what does this mean? Well, I spent the better part of yesterday watching every review I could find, and a lot of the reviews didn't go into a lot of details, and the reason for this is because they're dealing with pre-production units, and as Fro knows and several others said, including Chris Nichols and Jordan Drake, they didn't have more than a couple of hours at times, or even a day, and that didn't give them enough time to truly test. So it's very hard to kind of glean certain capabilities, and there's one I'm going to talk about a little later on about oversample video that there seems to be some contradictions. But I was really impressed with what Peter McKinnon did in his video. Now, there's a few times where he kind of glossed over things such as, what was it, upscaling and a few of those things. But when it came to, should we say, the noise reduction or the improvements in video, he did a really good job, because he didn't just talk about it, but he used an awful lot of B-roll showing you both the before and graded differences for Canon Log 2, as well as 8-bit, stating that
we didn't have any lights, there were very few windows, and typically the R5 I would work in those conditions, but you get that muddy, kind of mushed black. That was always a downfall of the R5 I. I did not see any of that with this camera.
Again, if you haven't watched Peter McKinnon's video on the R5 Mark II, I highly recommend giving it a view. But now let's turn our attention back to that sensor, that stacked full-frame sensor. It definitely provides a faster response time, closer to that of the R3 according to Canon, and it reduces rolling shutter and better autofocus at low light to -6.5 EV. Technically speaking, as the R5 Mark II can do 8K up to 60 frames per second, in-camera downsampling to 4K at 60 is also possible, or at least should be. But I'm hearing conflicting information. Some people who had the camera are telling me that, no, it can't do 8K oversample 4K up to 60 frames per second, just 30 frames per second. But when we take a look at the marketing material by Canon, it shows that the simple answer is yes, it can do 8K oversampled 4K up to 60 frames per second. It can also do 4K oversampled 2K. So technically speaking, the R5 Mark II should be able to do 8K oversampled 4K up to 60 frames per second. But at this point, with a whole bunch of pre-production units out there, with a firmware not, well, up to a production unit, things could change. And as we saw with the Canon 90D back in 2019, once we had an announcement with people testing pre-production cameras, they said, yes, this camera does all I. Yes, it does 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. But the very next morning, well, it couldn't do 24 frames per second and didn't do all I. And even that morning, the day after the announcement, Canon was saying, yes, it does do this, and then corrected a few hours later saying, nope, our bad, it doesn't. So I really do expect this camera to be able to do 8K oversampled, 4K up to 60 frames per second. It's only 30 frames per second more than the R5 Mark I, and because the camera can do 8K up to 60 frames per second, there should be no reason why it can't downsample it in camera. But again, we do have to wait and see. But there is one thing I want to talk about here. I just kind of went through some of the biggest challenges or complaints of the Mark I and how the Mark II addresses those. And that might be enough for many of you to make your decision. But one thing I noticed when I was going through all the countless videos, when I was going over the documentation, is that it seems in every aspect of this camera, Canon's done some refinements, some improvements to the capabilities of the camera, rounding off what was basically a version 1 of this camera, going from a DSLR to mirrorless. And that's pretty bold, that's pretty good, that's pretty exciting for many people, especially if they own the Mark I. So the question is that I posed at the beginning of this video, is it worth it to get the R5 Mark II? Well, I can simply answer that question for me. There's several video capabilities that I'm looking forward to. The elimination of that IBIS wobble, or the reduction of it to the point where we don't notice it, that is significant. I've spent a lot of money on trips to go out and capture B-roll that I had to toss because the results were terrible. So having that full-size HDMI port, having an autofocus system that allows me to capture a scene such as karate or any sports where my son is involved, because that's a lot of what I capture is team sports. And it's great shooting my son if he's at the beach or if my wife's at the beach and they're just alone. That's fine. The autofocus never misses a beat. But when other subjects get in the way, when other objects get in the way, or my son temporarily moves behind a pole or something and comes back, the autofocus will hunt and never looks professional, never looks cinematic. So I'm really happy to have the improvements in the autofocus system. But the low light performance, the dynamic range with Canon Log 2, and whether you're a photographer or videographer, that STEC sensor, along with the autofocus system, along with the enhancements of low light performance and that noise reduction, this makes this a very compelling purchase for me, and I have already pre-ordered the camera. So how do I help you come to a decision? Well, this is what I've always recommended in the past. Jot down on a piece of paper or use a spreadsheet. In a couple of words or so, just come up with a single title for the different capabilities that you're looking for. In one column, have the R5 Mark I, and the other column, the R5 Mark II, and just on a scale of 1 to 5, rate each camera. And then maybe highlight which capabilities are mandatory, because that's the ones you want to look at first. If the R5 Mark II has it and the Mark I doesn't, well, that's a really good point in favor of the Mark II. There is a huge price difference. I mean, at $28.99 versus $42.99, we're looking at what? $1,300, $1,400, over $1,000 between the two cameras. If you own the Mark I and you don't see a huge difference, then stick with the Mark I. But I think with this higher price, it certainly gives Canon the opportunity to drop the price by $100 or $200 by Black Friday. So if you're not in a hurry to buy the R5 Mark II, then maybe wait for Black Friday. That is the one day this year where you're going to see the best deals. And with the camera coming out in August, that's only 2 months away before Black Friday, so there is a chance we might miss that date. Both cameras are very good. And if you own Canon EF or RF glass, then you probably want to stick with the R5, the Mark I, or the Mark II. But if you own Nikon glass, then go to the Nikon Z8 at $34.96. It offers many of the same capabilities as the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. And while the Mark II does have a better autofocus system, more accurate autofocus system, the Z8 is a very, very powerful camera. Now, if you don't own any lenses, you're not committed to any platform, then what I would recommend doing is don't look at the camera bodies as much. First of all, take a look at all the lenses that are out there and ask yourself which lenses you're going to want to buy today, and then look at your roadmap into the future. And even some of those expensive ones, don't rule them off, because if you get good at what you're doing, or if your business starts to flourish, you're going to want to spend money on those higher end ones. So ask yourself, which system provides you with the better glass that you're going to need, and then look at saying, okay, should I go Nikon? Should I go Canon? Or should I even go Sony? And if this video has helped you to come to a realization or a decision, then please consider using my affiliate links down below to purchase the Canon EOS R5 Mark I, pre-order the R5 Mark II, or pick up the Nikon Z8. I'll be honest with you, I don't make an awful lot of money off the ads that come up in this video. The real bread and butter to this channel is what I make off pre-orders and affiliate links. And I want to say a special thanks to you and everybody else that purchased and pre-ordered cameras in the past, especially yesterday with the R5 Mark II. It's what's allowed me to turn this into a real business, to take this month off, committed to providing you with the latest coverage, and also to be able to do all the research behind the R5 Mark II, and what's supposed to be coming out, to be able to deliver a professional result to you as much as possible. Yesterday broke records for me. That was the first time ever that I was able to deliver a live stream with 1,135 peak concurrent viewers, over 7,200 views in a single hour, despite the live stream happening at 5 o'clock in the morning in my primary target area. I'd never seen that before. And to have 5 wonderful guests, from Dwayne to Graham, I'm having trouble remembering everybody's names. I'm trying to picture the screen, to Jack, to James, to all of you. It was a terrific live stream. I was able to focus on my guests, to be able to answer the questions, to give you what we thought was happening. And a big thanks to my sources. I was the only one who was able to deliver the actual leaked prices of these cameras, and also accurate leaked specifications within 24 hours before the announcement. So a big thanks to all of you that have used my affiliate links in the past. That's why I have them in the description down below. However, I do need to be further transparent to let you know that if you do use these links, I could make anywhere from 2 to 8%. And like I said, that's what has allowed me to turn this into an actual business. And it's changed my future as I move into retirement, which will happen in something like 5 years or so. I know that this is going to be my retirement gig. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to keep bringing you the latest and greatest camera news. And as more and more sources start to trust me, I'll be able to deliver you more accurate and trustworthy information. So thank you for watching. Thank you for using my affiliate links, my pre-order links, and a big thanks to all my sources out there. And if you've got information, then certainly bring it to me. You can do it anonymously using my email address. And you can also reach out to me on Facebook. And what else do I use? I think that's kind of it. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great week, a great weekend. And if you're not already aware, the Canon EOS R5 Mark II isn't going to ship until August the 20th. So if you're still kind of on the fence, I would recommend going ahead and pre-ordering it, because if you go ahead and pre-order it, you can always back out later. But it has, I can tell you from the analytics already, the amount of people that have pre-ordered the R5 Mark II has far and exceeded. So comparing it to the Nikon Z8, I would say we're looking at 10 times the amount of cameras that were pre-ordered. 10 times. And in terms of the C400, it's more like 25 times. There's huge demand for this camera. So if you're kind of on the fence, go ahead and pre-order it. You can always cancel before the shipping date, but just keep an eye on that shipping date to see if it changes, so you don't lock yourself in. You can always go ahead and back out, because you don't have to pay anything to pre-order. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.